All right, perfect.
And throughout this process, Kira and I will be working together. So whenever you email me, just make sure you CC Kira. She's been on all the emails so far, but that way, just in case I'm out of the office for whatever reason, she's around and she can hopefully help you out too. So, and then let's go that we've got a couple folks from, or at least one folk from the Supervisor Palchik's office, Vanessa.
Hi, like Nicole said, I'm from the Supervisor Dahlia Palchik's office, and I'm here to monitor the progress and keep our office informed as the process goes along. We'll be a good point of contact, and we're supporting through it. So feel free to reach out to me with any needs.
Great, thank you. And we do have a planning commissioner here with us tonight. Phil, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, good evening, and thanks for convening this. I'm Phil Najolski-Eichner. I'm the planning commissioner for Providence District, and have had the opportunity to work with the Holmes community on a couple of, well, one in particular controversial development that was the catalyst for thinking about this as an option for the community to consider to perhaps help maintain the integrity of the neighborhood over time. So I'm happy to be able to observe the process and be a resource to you as might be needed over time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. Okay, so then we also have a few folks that are going to be joining us as part of the team from our Architectural Review Board and our History Commission, so that way we have a little bit of their expertise and knowledge too. People's videos are going in and out, so we'll start with Samantha. You look like you're still on.
Hi, I'm Samantha. I'm from Architectural Review Board. I'm a licensed architect, and I'm very excited to join this group. It's my first time joining this workforce. Excited about what I can learn and also excited about what I can contribute to.
Thank you, Samantha. Kay, do you think you have service? I think you're frozen.
I'm frozen.
We can hear you a little bit. If you stop your video, it might work.
Okay. I'm not, okay. 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 I am Kay Orr. I'm a part of Holmes. And I'm excited, actually, your community. So I'm very excited to be part of this group. Sorry.
Yeah, you cut in it a little bit, but yeah, Kay's also an architect on the Architectural Review Board. So, and if you could, when somebody, yeah, mute. I think you guys have probably all done this fairly often since the pandemic started, but just, yeah, if you're not the one speaking, just make sure to mute. We get a lot of feedback on this system. So, Elise, are you able to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Elise Murray. serve on the county's History Commission, which is a 21-member board that advises the Board of Supervisors and generally promotes history of Fairfax County. One member of the History Commission sits on the Architectural Review Board, and I'm that member. I've done it for many years. I also, it may have broken up, but Kay and I both had served on the Holland Hills work group, so we have a little understanding of what you're doing here.
Great, thank you, Elise. Okay, I think that is all of the staff and Architectural Review Board members and History Commission. So we'll start by going through all of the volunteers from Holmes Run Acres. I'm just going to kind of go down the list that I have here in front of me, and if I miss anybody, please let me know. So we'll start with, is it Arvidas?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I am an architect, retired, been living in Holmes on Acre since 1963, and will stay here till my expiration date.
Great, thank you so much. David.
Hi, I'm here as a layman, but as someone with a lot of interest in historic preservation and what other communities out of state have done. I also know a little bit about what the county has done in Holland Hills and am interested in learning more.
Okay, Jennifer, or Jen, I think you said you wanted to go by.
I go by Jenny. I think Patrick's backup. I live right across the street from Arvidas. This is a Holmes run kitchen. I'm doing my dishes as we talk. Yeah, I guess I'm Patrick's backup. I was originally against this and then went to the meeting that we had at Woodburn. Is that the name of the school? Whatever. I don't have kids. Whatever the school is over there. And honestly got on board because it seemed unenforceable. So I am really interested in architecture though, and I do want to preserve the architectural integrity of the community. I just want to make sure that it's done in a way that, you know, doesn't infringe on people's rights, so to speak. So
No, that's great, thank you. Edith, I saw that you just joined. We're just doing introductions right now, Edith. If you just want to obviously give your name and then just a brief summary of how you got involved.
Sure. I think most people know that I'm a past president of the Holmes Run Acres Civic Association, a recent past president. And while I was tenured there, well, actually prior to that, I was involved in defeating a development that was happening across the street from Holmes Run Acres that would have really had, well, it would have destroyed the houses along Gallows. It would have moved development closer to the houses on Sycamore, and it really would have had a huge impact on the traffic on Gallows, which would have affected our neighborhood worse than it already affects it now. And then finally, I think it would have been the beginning of setting a precedent for bucking the comprehensive plan and destroying stable single-family residences and neighborhoods. And so we fought it really pretty actively. And I noticed the neighborhood really got behind us, even though this was a project that was in the Mason District, not in Providence District. We were the loudest and most committed opposition. And so armed with that, and during that process, the developer who was filing the application, who had been invited to the table by the Mason District supervisor, mentioned to Lafayette Village across the street that they were actively, and I quote, actively looking at sites in Holmes Run Acres to tear down and develop. And so it was clear to me that we were hot commodity sites. And I did a little bit of investigation because I was kind of all new to this. By profession, I'm an architect, so I'm not that new to development, and I've been on the other side of this. I've presented projects to in historic overlay districts and to ANCs and to the National Capital Planning Commission and Commission of Fine Arts. So I'm very familiar with the way historic overlays work. But I was kind of shocked that it would come so soon to our neighborhood here. And then when Mosaic really took off, it really became clear that if you look at it sort of from 10,000 feet, we are a neighborhood that has not had turnover since the 50s. There are a couple of reasons for that, and we're rife for that kind of target. And so I got involved in asking somebody from the Heritage resource staff to come over, outgoing Linda Blank, to come over and talk to the community about what tools might be in our arsenal to, fight development. And this was at the suggestion of Linda Smith, who was then our Providence District Supervisor. And Linda came and spoke with the community, and a lot of us were on board immediately with the idea of a historic overlay district. For one, I'm the person who invited her. I wasn't. And part of the reason for that is because I heard a lot of questions about materials and colors of doors and things that to me made me realize I think people are assuming this is sort of a analogous to historic or to a homeowners association, which it just is not. And so there were two reasons why I wasn't immediately embracing it. One of them was I felt like we didn't have a comprehensive understanding of what exactly historic overlay district was and how it differed from a homeowners association, which many of us bought into this neighborhood precisely because it did not have a homeowners association. The second one was that I didn't feel like there was a unanimous interest in this. There was a high interest in it, but not unanimous. And we're a very close-knit neighborhood, and I didn't want to create any rifts in the neighborhood. We're, you know, at our heart a really fun community, so I didn't want to change that. But then as we got a couple years down the line, I realized that's kind of our last gas. And when the two houses on Holmes Run got torn down, that was sort of the siren song. That was the alarm. And I was no longer the president of the Civic Association, but nevertheless, I was getting upwards of 2, 3, 4, 5, sometimes more emails a day from terribly disgruntled neighbors saying, come on, what can we do? We fought the development. Why aren't we taking a bigger stance on this? How can we prevent this? You know, is my house next? And that kind of thing. So I formed the Friends of Holmes Run Acres, which was a non-board group of people who looked at tying owners with real estate agents and other measures, trying to track what houses might get affected and, you know, which houses were on the chopping block and which ones were rentals and didn't look like they were in good shape, so they were easy targets for demo. And we tried for about 1.5 years to, and we had some success. I think we saved probably 2, maybe even 3 houses from tear down or egregious additions. But it was clear it was a full-time job, and I didn't have that kind of time to devote to it. And we needed a different way of doing this. So we revisited the idea of a historic overlay district, and this time took a different approach, which was really to come in from the ground up and say, look, you know, I'm leading the charge, but I'm maybe not as ignorant about the process, because as I said, I've dealt with it professionally many times, but as it pertains to Holmes Run Acres, I really didn't have a sense of how that would look. There were other things that happened. Holland Hills had reached out to me. And they were ahead of us in this process. We had gotten our historic registry before Holland Hills had, but they were ahead of us in the historic overlay. So that was interesting to me. And I could kind of see from what they were going through that they were just maybe 2 or 3 years ahead of us in tear downs and you know, additions that were non-contributing. So anyway, all that got us to launch the campaign last October, which was really just an information campaign, which just said, look, you know, I've heard your call. I'm no longer doing this sort of as your president, but I'm doing this as a resident. So it's not initially being driven by the board. It was initially a Friends of Holmes Run Acres effort. But you know, we have to get informed, because if this is a tool that we can use, then shame on us if we don't use it. And so that's what started the whole effort. And through the investigation and through me reading about Holland Hills and also reading about just articles from people as far as Oregon to Washington State to New Jersey, like so many people are coming up against this, where they live in modest neighborhoods. They, you know, they're bedroom communities to urban employment centers, and they are being targeted. And so it's not a foreign thing. And there's a lot written on there, out there. So obviously not all that pertains to us. It's not the same architecture, but it's clear others have decided this is their only step forward. That's why we got involved. And you know, in the end, we ended up taking a survey. We were initially told that Linda Smith was still the supervisor at that point. She said, you know, I want to show a majority of support for this before I would okay it on the board of promote it on the board of supervisors. And then we had gone to a Holland Hills meeting. Supervisor Stork had mentioned that they had a 70% buy-in. And so I just sort of said, okay, that's our target. Our target is going to be a clear majority, not just a majority. So again, that was something self-imposed by us for our own neighborhood, just because we are a very special and tight-knit neighborhood. And the rest of it, I think everybody on this group knows. We obtained the clear majority.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So next on the list is Keith Gardner.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm Keith Gardner. I've been in the acres since 1966. Arvidas and I have been interested in trying to protect the architectural integrity of the acres for a long time. We put out a publication maybe 10 years ago, which tried to do it through education. And certainly I'm aware of the Friends of Homes Run Acres too, and everything done that way. And I've come to the reluctant conclusion that none of those ways are going to work, and that we have to look at the HOD as really our last opportunity to prevent in particular, to prevent teardowns. But my interest is to do it in a way that retains as absolute much support from the community as we can get. And that will be one of my main interests.
Great, thank you. Robert.
Hey, I'm the Robert Capizzello. I've been in the acres now since 2004, so almost 16 years. My background is actually I have a degree in architectural engineering, so not a licensed architect, but I play with them a lot. But I love the acres, love this particular style of house, and very much looking forward to working to find a way to maintain this neighborhood.
All right, Nancy.
Oh, crap.
There you are. I think you're unmuted. Yes. You're unmuted now, Nancy?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Thanks. I'm Nancy Gueron. I've only been here so relatively summer, and we have loved raising our kids in this house. And I think my son's inspiration for becoming an architect has been living in these houses and growing up in them. And so preserved, and I look forward to working with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we've got Patrick.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Thanks for putting this together, by the way. I'm glad to see this kick off. I think most people who are online know that I've always been an advocate of property rights, personal property rights. I, like many, by the way, I'm not sure everybody online realizes this, was not thrilled with some of the houses that went up in the neighborhood. I, of course, would look for different ways to control sort of destroying the neighborhood first. But I'm definitely interested in participating from a perspective of there are probably, we'll say 20% or so of the neighborhood that has concerns about how this gets implemented. And I'd like to be able to make sure that that information is shared and concerns are shared. Edith hit on a very important factor of, I think some people confuse homeowners associations with HODs. I do have a background in urban planning, not from a practicing perspective, but from an educational background. And I understand all of these processes and how they get implemented, but I certainly share, the concern of what's appropriate for the neighborhood and what isn't. From one perspective, I'm not too concerned about the sizes of houses as much as I am with the architecture and making sure that it's a proper fit. Some folks have different notions of that, but I want to make sure that the participation why I wanted to do this was to make sure that those folks who have the same concerns that I do is that we're trying to maintain our architectural integrity and not going down the path of, colors of paint on your door and things like that. But I will readily admit there is a house or two. One of the houses I like that went up. It's modern. It probably doesn't fit everybody's idea, but it didn't offend me as badly as one of them that went up. And I think, you know, there's a lot to preserve within the neighborhood. I think I would like to, you know as we move forward, there's, specific criteria associated with becoming a historic overlay district. And I really want to hear from the county of what the benefit is to the county in establishing a historic overlay district, because I have had a hard time looking at the criteria and understanding why this would be of interest to the county. And I'm not prepared. I have my views, and I'm not going to state them without having, going through lots of these meetings first to understand that. But I certainly have my concerns on what the benefit is to the county. Why would we do certain things? But overall, I do share the concern of everybody in the neighborhood of what's appropriate for the neighborhood, but we also have to balance that out with, home ownership and personal property rights. And then why is this meaningful for the county? And I'd like to understand that. So that's why I volunteered.
Great, thank you all. I think I got everybody. If I didn't speak up now, I believe everyone's able to introduce themselves. And so, yeah, we also have one more person, Sarah, but I think she wasn't able to make the meeting tonight. And so the work group, there's 6 of you that are considered the regulars, and then there's 3 alternates. You all know who you are. And so I was talking to Jenny when she first got on. Today's meeting is going to be very introductory, kind of getting through what the process is going to look like for us, kind of what we're hoping to do. And so it's very informative. After that, if the alternates don't want to be at every meeting, that's probably okay. But maybe make sure that you stay up on kind of what's happening. The week or so after the meeting, the video will go up. So if you do want to watch the video, if you missed the meeting, it'll be there. We'll also have summary minutes of the meeting. And then, of course, you can also just call me if you have any questions, if there's something that you wanted to know. So, all right. So we're going to kind of, Eve, did you have a question?
I did, just very briefly, in terms of the recorded video, is that something that we could make public on our website, or is that something that you want to keep,
it'll be on the Fairfax County website, so it's definitely going to be public. I'll have to ask about the process of, because it's a fairly large file, obviously, but I'll ask about if it could be, you might be able to just put a link on your website to it.
No, I think that's what that's all I'm asking, is whether we have access to that. Yeah, thanks. So we're trying to still figure out, we'll do that internally, how we're going to share with the rest of the neighborhood, so that it's just, my goal through this is to make this ultra transparent. I don't want to have any sense that people aren't in the loop, and we have a very well-read group of people. So I think that we haven't figured out exactly how that's going to work, but we're going to probably create a section on our website where we can upload all this.
We'll talk a little bit about the kind of communication as we go on today. So I've got, we're going to go through, I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint. Obviously, you guys are welcome to have your videos on or not. It's up to you guys as we go through this. If you have any questions, there is a Q&A box on your screen down to the right. And you should have a little place next to your name to raise your hand if you have a question. And there's also, like, if you hover over your name, you can chat with people, or you can chat with all of us. And if Kira and I are both going to be trying to watch that. But of course, if you can't get my attention or whatever, you can also just put your thing on, wave. If you have any questions as we go throughout this, want to make sure that everybody's up to speed at the same time. Okay. So, all right, so perfect. Okay, so Holmes Run Acres potential HOD, and that's something you'll hear me say a lot and kind of throughout this process. It's a potential HOD, historic overlay district, even though as we go through this process, we're going to be talking about it as if it was happening. Nothing through this process is saying that a potential historic overlay district will happen. We're tasked by the zoning ordinance to evaluate all these things. So that's why we're looking at all these things. But obviously, and we'll talk about this more as we go through, nothing is guaranteed. So this is just part of the process that we're going through. Okay, so we've already done our welcome and introductions. We're going to go through and we'll start by reviewing the binder material. And Edith, you had asked about the printouts. Yeah, we can print stuff out and mail it to you. What I'll ask is after the meeting tonight or tomorrow, if you do want a hard copy, just send me an email letting me know. And I will try to get, we don't go in the office right now very much or at all, basically, but I will try to get in there next week and mail them out to you. So I will try to remember and send you guys an email asking for your addresses. Okay. So I'm not going to read the whole work group and staff role. I'm sure hopefully you guys have read some of that. So here are kind of some of the highlights. So for staff, we are tasked with leading and coordinating these work group meetings. And as I mentioned early on, these will be virtual for the foreseeable future. I mean, God willing, someday soon we can all be in a room together again. But as long as this works out okay for everybody, we're going to continue to do it like this. And obviously let folks know that they can always log in and view the meetings live too. There's an attendee link on the website, on our Holmes Run Acre website. So it'll show each meeting, and 2 weeks before there will be a link. So if anybody in the neighborhood wants to listen in, they are more than welcome to. We are also responsible for conducting and presenting technical work necessary for the work group to give input on what a potential HOD would look like and how it would function. And that is kind of what we'll be doing over these next few months. We will also coordinate with other county agencies such as the Park Authority and FCDOT as necessary. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. We're also responsible for taking input and recommendations from you all and also from the larger community. As Edith mentioned, that will be something that we'll work on reaching out to in other ways. And at the end of this whole process, before it goes to Planning Commission or the Board of Supervisors, we will draft a staff report that gives the recommendations regarding the potential HOD to the Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors. And just to note that there's nothing in this that says an HOD has to happen. So our recommendations will come through all of this work, and it could be through this process. We don't feel that it warrants an HOD, or we do feel it does, but here are the parameters that we think it should be. And then the Planning Commission and the board, the Planning Commission will give their recommendations, and then the board ultimately will be the ones to decide. So for you all, what we'd like to see is, obviously you're here because you live in the community. So we need your expertise and speak for the community interests. And that's also why it's great that we have people with different interests about how this should happen or should not happen. That will help focus it and also kind of guide the process. And I think that's really important. So that way we are getting all the different perspectives as much as we can, so that if there is an HOD, it does reflect the community. You'll act as a sounding board for staff and advise them on potential community concerns. Again, feel free at any point, if somebody has some issues, to tell them to email me or call me. I'm happy to speak with whoever in the community at any time. Relay information to and solicit broader input for the others in the community, and provide input on the technical work that we'll present at these meetings. Okay. And then I'm just, so goals of the work group. We want to determine what the characteristics that define the HRA neighborhood. What makes it unique? What makes it important? What would you want to see preserved if an HOD is approved? We want to make recommendations for what it would look like. So this would include things like the boundaries. What would be an adverse effect to a contributing structure? What would make a structure not contribute to a historic overlay district? What should be in the zoning ordinance? That's kind of what Lily was talking about earlier. That will be the regulatory part of this. What should be included in the design guidelines, as those state? Those are just the guidelines, and both of those we'll talk a little bit more in the meeting here. And again, just the work group, you guys are giving your input to staff, and then staff is who will make the recommendation to the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. Okay. Just going to pull up the rest of the binder materials. We're not obviously going to read all of it because Just bear with me as I switch content. I can only share one thing at a time, so. Okay. So, give me 1 second. Yeah. Okay, so this is the binder that you all received. And yeah, we will kind of add to it as we go, different documents. We'll send you guys the agenda before every meeting, so that way you're prepared. So roles and responsibilities. Obviously the map, we'll talk a little bit more about the map and boundaries a little bit later. But right now, this is the map that comes from the National Register nomination form. And that's kind of obviously where we're starting our research from. So the yellow are the non-contributing structures, and then the green are the contributing structures. Then this is the actual zoning ordinance. Again, don't feel that you have to read the whole thing, but if you do want to take a deep dive into what the purpose of historic overlay districts are and how we're going to form them, all that information is in here. And it also talks about the ARB and how that is formed. So there's ARB. And then each historic overlay district has their own appendix in the zoning ordinance. So for example, I've just pulled Lake Anne, which is kind of one of our own. If you've looked at the historic overlay districts in the county, you'll see that a lot of them they were made a long time ago. And so there's usually 1 or 2 historic resources, and then there's like kind of this big buffer around it. Lake Anne's a little bit different because it's a little bit more residential. So it's a little more similar. Obviously, Holland Hills, it's in the process too, is much more similar to Holmes Run Acres. But you'll see this is what's specific to Lake Anne. There's not a ton of information in there. And so this is the stuff that we will be talking about as we go through this process, like the bulk regulations. You'll see under that there, where my cursor is, building height shall be compatible with the intent of the district. So that one for them is not very specific, where you'll see other ones that'll say no building height over 35 feet. So we can adjust it as necessary for the Holmes Run Acres potential overlay district. And then these are our very old design guidelines. And so this is what the ARB uses to talk to people that come in with an application, a permit application. We are actually in the process right now of redoing all of our design guidelines. We're going to have an overriding document for kind of an overarching view of design guidelines for all historic overlay districts. And then each historic overlay district will have its own. So again, as part of this process, the information that we're getting from you will inform the design guidelines that will be drafted for the potential Holmes Run Acres HOD. We're working on trying to get a contractor in place that will do that for us so that they can attend these meetings and be part of the process so they can hear directly from you guys what is important and what's not. And I'll show you a little bit later in the presentation. We do have, for Centerville, we have slightly newer guidelines. They're 2010, I believe. And the ones that would be created for this will look a bit more like that and have a lot more pictures to make them a lot easier to use for just about anybody. And then at the end, obviously, just some extra resources. So if you wanted to do some more research, there's some Fairfax County resources. Obviously, we have a ton of stuff on our Heritage Resources homepage. It's also helpful if you go look at Holland Hills, you can go through and look. We have all of our previous meetings for Holland Hills up there, so the minutes will be up there. We didn't record those meetings, obviously, because they were in person, but the minutes are there. So if you want to see kind of the progression of what we did there, or just hear some of the conversations or concerns that they had, those are available too. And then these are just more kind of about mid-century and historic districts that can be helpful. So, okay, go back to our presentation. And Oh, yes, ARB, question. ARB stands for the Architectural Review Board, and we will discuss kind of their role and how it works in an HOD just a little bit.
Nicole, I'm having problems with I think there's a Q&A tab that I see.
Yes.
I can't seem to send a question.
I'm having the same problem.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
can't. The send is grayed out. It doesn't allow me to access it.
Oh, no.
Right, that's the problem I'm having.
I also didn't see the question that you just answered.
You can also send questions just to me too. So
try just hitting return.
Vanessa did it in the chat, actually. Let me see if
try hitting return.
I did. It didn't work.
Give me 1 second and see if I can change that.
This COVID
really weird.
experience, no, it's like, yeah, we have all these IT issues on everything that we do anymore. But yeah, I can't send privately or return.
Yeah, Kira?
I'm having the same issue with the Q&A.
Yeah,
I'm able to get the chat to work.
I've got it open, and it says that you guys have the ability to chat, and
we can chat. I just sent a message, but if
you can't do Q&A.
X out the Q&A. Yeah.
You're right. That's the same issue I'm having. I can send individual ones, but I can't send it to the Q&A.
Okay. So just, I don't know why that's never happened before. So, always something. Yeah. So just use the chat or feel free to pop on and, yeah.
I just have a quick question, Nicole. The green and yellow map, is that, and I apologize, I looked at it so cursorily today, I didn't know. I know you surveyed homes run since the Historic Registry survey, obviously that was done in 2007, actually at the end of 2006. Is that green and yellow map current to today of contributing and non-contributing, or is that still representative of the survey done for the Historic Registry?
No, so that's the National Register map. So that has not changed since 2007. So part of the process that we will be going through during this work group, and eventually what our recommendations will be one way or the other, will be to update that map. Because obviously there are a number of houses, and somebody else asked that too about the Tuscan Palace. Yes, obviously some of those would definitely be changed to non-contributing. But then there'll be some other ones that we're going to discuss in this group together to determine them. So.
Okay, and then we also have to be mindful of the ones on upper executive that are post before, so they don't share any of our architecture, but this is a gray area because our architecture doesn't add up to a pile of beans if we don't have our nature, and those houses on upper executive still have our nature, so we have to.
And that will be part of the conversation that we have. We'll talk a little bit more about that tonight with the boundaries. We'll touch on that just a little bit more. And Patrick, I saw your question about other examples of neighborhoods. Yeah, there definitely are some other examples in Virginia. I don't have them on hand right now, but that's something we can get and email you guys.
Okay, yeah, that was always the big question I always had, is that many of the examples in Fairfax County are not neighborhoods, and Holland Hills has not gone through being officially designated. So it's sort of like we're paving the way, and I'm trying to figure out if there are examples of neighborhoods within the state of Virginia, or do we have to go further outside to see, what's provided. But I think Holland Hills will provide us some ideas, and I think from my perspective, there were certainly things that I didn't like in the Holland Hills one, but that's only one example. And I think because this is new for neighborhoods, trying to understand, what other examples that we could, look at to get a feel for that would be very helpful.
Pat, I can tell you that Maywood and Arlington near Cherrydale has an entire neighborhood preserved. It's going to be a lot stricter than I think anyone in the Acres would like. But it could be used as a study in contrast, however.
Yeah,
okay,
and I think
cool.
Yeah, that's a great one. And I think that's something to remember too. I think a lot of people, when they think of historic districts, they're thinking of historic Alexandria and how very, very specific it is. This potential HOD could be what you want it to be. It does not have to be that every single house has to look the same and that every single paint color, obviously we can't regulate paint color, but yeah, but that's what we'll talk about too, is we may be able to make it a less restrictive version, depending on what everybody wants. So, okay. Moving along.
Nicole,
yeah.
Go ahead. Well, I was just going to add, I think that that's important because I know when I spoke with my counterpart at Holland Hills, you know, they're a star architecture neighborhood. They have the Charles Goodman that kind of put them on the map, and then, you know, whatever else happened, and they've always been at a higher price point. So they got hit with development and with higher price point sort of development sooner than we did. But one thing that I think is much more intact with Holmes Run Acres than it is with Holland Hills, despite the fact that there's some lovely houses in Holland Hills, is this modest scale and the clear abundance of green and nature. And the neighborhood was also started differently in Holland Hills in that it was started as a starter home, modest neighborhood without a star architect. And it was intentionally, you know, the architects intended for people to add on to it as their means and needs required them to. So I just think it's a different, to Patrick's point, it's a different community than Holland Hills for that reason. And I think what's going to be tricky moving forward with the design guidelines is to embrace the fact that these houses were actually designed to allow additions to happen. What we're really trying to do, I think, is encourage the additions to happen in the right way. And I think a lot of people, you know, speaking as an architect, I think I get the accusation a lot that that's just a subjective feeling, but it's not. There are many objective ways to direct, you know, so I just want to be clear.
No, I think that's a good point. And that's, I think, to me, that is kind of the point of a historic overlay district, is to take something that could be very subjective and to put parameters on it. And that'll be the conversation that we have throughout this process. And I think Patrick kind of mentioned is how, if it's to happen, what are those parameters and how restrictive or non-restricted would it be? So we'll definitely have those conversations as we go. So just a little history. Most of you probably know this, but just briefly kind of why we're here. Obviously, it was constructed between 1951 and 1958 by the Laurier brothers. They created a subdivision with affordable houses in harmony with nature, and obviously, as you all know, took advantage of the natural terrain and surroundings. They hired the architects Satterley and Lethbridge to design small, inexpensive houses using standardized building features and modules. And as you said, Edith, part of that was they wanted to make sure that it was easy to add on to. They used modern design. That's one of the reasons this neighborhood and also like Holland Hills are considered significant, is because at a time when there's a huge suburban boom and neighborhoods were going up all over, they were very much cookie cutter, kind of colonial or ranch style. Instead, you've got architects using a much different style, and which was great. And then it was quickly listed on the inventory, the county inventory, in 1977. And then, as you all know, the National Register Historic District listing on 2007. And most people know this, but just to remind everybody, kind of the reason that we have historic overlay districts in the county is because both the inventory and the National Register are honorific. There's no restrictions that come with those. It wants to encourage preservation and education about the history, but there's no federal laws that can restrict that. Let's see if there we go. Yeah, so the map. So again, we'll talk about this. This is, again, the contributing and non-contributing map from the National Register. Yellow non-contributing, green contributing. So this, has not changed since 2007. So as we mentioned before, Kira and I went out in the spring and we went through the neighborhood. Some of you saw us. I even ran into Edith one day. And we took pictures of every single structure that we could. There was one or two that was hard to see. We might need your help getting pictures of those. And then since then, what we've been doing is starting to analyze changes that have happened since the National Register nomination. We've been doing that, looking at photos and also looking at permits. Luckily, we have all of our permits digital now, for at least this neighborhood. And so we can go back and we can actually see what additions and changes have been made over the years, as long as there is a permit. Occasionally, one or two have lost. So as we go through this process, one of the things that we will talk about, and we have to talk about from the zoning ordinance, are the boundaries. And we'll have a meeting where we talk specifically about this. And so there's things that we can include or not include, obviously the parks or the school. And as Edith mentioned, there was talk originally about Executive Drive. Obviously not Holmes Run Acres houses, but also small houses, mostly Cape Coddish kind of things, but they do add maybe a possible buffer. So that'll be a conversation that we will have about whether or not they should be in, and if they are in, obviously they would probably be non-contributing, but they would still have to go to the ARB if they were going to do a demo and a permit, which would mean they would have to be conscious about what they were building. Again, they couldn't just build whatever they wanted. They'd have to talk to the ARB. Let me check the chat real quick. Everything's good. Okay. Oops. Okay. What is the Architectural Review Board? So it's a group of 11 members that are appointed by the Board of Supervisors with professional expertise in preservation, history, architecture. There's landscape architects, historians, and what their role is they hear and approve building permits and sign permits within historic overlay districts. And then they also review and make recommendations for rezoning and site plans. And so the ARB review process. So for people within a historic overlay district, if they are going to do something that causes them to have to get a permit, which the next slide will talk about what those possibilities are, you would have to submit an application and supporting materials, so plans, drawings, etc., whatever is required for what you're doing. If the application is deemed complete, then you'll be scheduled for the discussion and/or an action at the next ARB meeting. The ARB meets once a month. I think it's usually the second Thursday of the month. At the meeting, the board members will have discussion with the applicant about the proposed alterations. And in this process, they will be using the zoning ordinance and then also the design guidelines. And again, that will be the key, will be the design guidelines, because that is when you have a conversation. If there are agreement on the details, the ARB will generally vote for approval. If they're unsure or they want some changes, all they'll do is ask you to go back and do some changes with your design process and then come back the next month. As far as I know, it's been very rare that they've ever denied a permit. Again, they don't want to deny permits. They just want to make sure that if you're within an HOD, you're following the design guidelines and the zoning ordinance, and it's fitting in with the character of the neighborhood. If it's approved, then the applicant gets an approval letter that will go with your building permit back to the county. So the zoning ordinance, that's the regulation, but we cannot require actions that are not already regulated by the zoning ordinance. So we can't tell you what paint color to use. We can't say you have to use this type of roofing material. The things, as I mentioned earlier, that may be considered in the process are things like height and setback. And those are the kind of things that you'll see in like the Lake Ann one that's there on the side. And Lily will help us when we get to that point about talking about what possibilities there are. The design guidelines. So these are the best practices for keeping the style and character of the neighborhood. They're not regulatory, so we cannot force anybody to do them. But again, they're going to have this conversation with the Architectural Review Board. And so if you come in with something that has, you know, like a high-pitched steep roof that does not resemble Holmes Run Acres, they're going to be like, well, if you look at the design guidelines, kind of need to go with a shed or a gable roof, and they'll help you adjust it as necessary. And again, like here, this is for Centerville, and this is just talking about the different types of windows that you see in Centerville. So they're just showing you pictures. And so the design guidelines will have something similar where it's like, hey, here are the types of windows that you see in Holmes Run Acres. This is what you should do. We're not going to tell you you have to buy from a certain vendor. We obviously can't do that. So it'll be up to the person that is putting in the permit what they want to do for that kind of stuff. Let's see, question. Zoning takes zoning takes precedence over HOD. If zoning permits 30 feet in height, the HOD cannot remove that. In that instance, it requires a change to the zoning, correct? And Lily, do you want to answer that?
Yes, that is correct. The HOD design guidelines can be more restrictive than the zoning ordinance, but it cannot be any more lenient than the zoning ordinance. So if the underlying development standards for the underlying zoning district, which in Holmes Run Acres case, it's R3, and the height is 35 feet. The maximum height can potentially be, let's say, 30 or 25 feet to make additions or new development more compatible with the existing structures in the potential HOD. But it should not exceed the maximum allowable height of 35 feet that the zoning office has in place.
Can I clarify something?
Yeah.
If someone came into Holmes Run, as I've understood what happens, that this is not regulatory, et cetera. If someone came into Holmes Run Acres and wanted to tear down what was there and build some brutalist monstrosity, my understanding is that they would go before the ARB in the permitting process, and the ARB would try to basically talk them into turning it into something mid-century modern. But if ultimately the person refused, you wouldn't deny that permit.
Well, that's a good question. They might, in my experience, what they will do is they won't approve their permit and they will ask them to come back with a different design.
They would reject it.
No, it's not quite a rejection because they could flat out deny it, but they won't. I haven't seen them do that. What they'll say is, can you please adjust this? If they're not comfortable with the design, they won't approve it. I think there are other ways eventually, if an applicant is not okay with that, that could go, but I've never seen that. I have seen somebody come back a number of times to try to get it right. But again, if there is something we do through this process want to put in the zoning ordinance, so you can't create a monstrosity that is regulatory, if there is something that we can do, like height or setbacks or something like that, then that would be the only kind of regulatory hook.
Okay. So I think what I was getting caught on was a distinction between rejecting a permit versus not approving a permit. You're just gonna let it linger so you don't have permission to build. Okay, I gotcha.
Yeah. Thank you. There I go, muting myself. Okay. Yeah, so the design guidelines, again, that will be a lot of the conversations and kind of where we're headed in this process. Okay, so how is an HOD created? And that's what we're going to be doing. So, yeah.
Oh, sorry. There was another question I submitted that had to do with one of the slides of the contributing and non-contributing houses. And I guess one of the questions I have is, there's this mosaic that's across the neighborhood. One part of the neighborhood tends to be more congruent than the other part of the neighborhood. How do you resolve this mosaic over time to return to contributing, and what are the legal implications? So if there's a historic overlay district, what do you do with the non-contributing houses? Because we have quite a few in the neighborhood that are spread out. It tends to be on one side of the neighborhood more than another, but how do you resolve that? And I think that comes along with the comment that you made about, what are the boundaries of the district?
There we go. Yeah, that's going to be something that we'll have to discuss specifically with boundaries. Once we get through looking at everything that is contributing and non-contributing, there could be a section that maybe lends itself to not being a part of the district. That's definitely a possibility. And also, yeah, it's a possibility if, as we're going through this, if staff feels like there's a lot of non-contributing at this point, I'm not sure there's a cohesive historic district at all, then that may end up being what's in our staff report and our recommendations. So that's, yeah, definitely both of those are a possibility. And that's something that we'll have to evaluate as we go through.
So kind of as a follow-up to that, I don't know if this is possible, and I think some people would be surprised that I even suggest this, but is there a way to, if a neighborhood's going through consideration for an HOD, is there legally a way to block significant building and stuff like that until the question is resolved. So it's a legal question. Phil may know the answer. I'm looking at Phil. I see his picture right now, but I'm just wondering, is there like a stay order of sorts that as we're going through this process or is it just cut and dry? It's either permitted or it's not permitted, or can you put a stay on like tear downs and rebuilds during the process of the neighborhood going through this? Because I think it would significantly protect us during this process, because I'm afraid that people are going to be motivated to move quickly to do things.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. As I understand it, there is not any kind of stay. So because there isn't right now any kind of regulatory mechanism in your neighborhood that could stop them or slow them down. No, I mean, and yeah, I guess that's a definite worry. I know that in the work that I've done so far, and especially at the community meeting, that was a question I felt like we got fairly often, was like, well, if we can't do this right now, is it going to be done in time? I can't answer if it'll be done in time to stop a bunch of demolitions. Hopefully it will be, but assuming it passes. So yeah, I don't know, Phil, if you know of anything else.
No, it's highly unlikely, probably not possible to ask a homeowner or property owner to not do something that property owner has the opportunity to do by right, consistent within the zoning ordinance, consistent within the property as it's currently zoned. If the property owner were to want to do something outside of the context of the zoning ordinance, such as, for example, a special exception or a change to the comprehensive plan, that would require, of course, approval. But outside of that, a property owner, has by right authorities to do what he or she would like to do.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so how is an HOD created? Obviously, this is the short version. Again, if you do want to look at the zoning ordinance that's in your packet, there's very specific things about how it should be created. So county staff at the direction of the Board of Supervisors, so that was the board motion that passed in January that directed us to do this work. We will conduct research and prepare a report with recommendations. This will include, but not limited to, analysis of current conditions, descriptions of individual structures, present trends, and desirable objectives for preservation. So we will be looking at each individual structure, and we'll have a description of each house in there. We'll say whether it's contributing or non-contributing, and obviously we'll have explanations about why we think Holmes Run Acres should be preserved as an HOD, if it should be. Also, use is likely to have an adverse effect on desired character. That just means what would be the thing that somebody would do to their structure to make it not contributing anymore? What would be those things? And then again, we've talked a few times, description and justification of boundaries. So if we want to change the boundaries from the National Register, we just have to explain why we think that's important for this historic overlay district. Okay, one more question. Let's see. I'm not sure, Edith, you have a question for Jenny, but.
No, Jenny had mentioned something to me. I just was seeking clarification. Okay. We can do this outside of the working group.
Yeah.
Okay. And then Vanessa asked, what is the definition of contributing and non-contributing? So basically, contributing structures are structures that show the character and have integrity of a Holmes Run Acres house. So they haven't been so modified that you look at it and you think that could be in any neighborhood. It doesn't look like Holmes Run Acres. And we're going to go through kind of defining what we think those characteristics are. We have a good start because there is a National Register nomination, so we'll use some of that, but we want to get your guys' input to what you think is significant and what we should be seeing on a Holmes Run Acres house. Non-contributing obviously would be something that's been modified so much that it does not convey that significance anymore. Okay, so we are going to talk about that. We're going to define the significant features of Holmes Run Acres. So things to think about here when we start having this conversation, and Kira is going to be writing this all down. So this will be something that we'll tomorrow or later this week share with you guys is kind of what we're going to be using throughout this process, and also show you kind of, we'll talk about National Register and then what Kira and I have looked at too. So think about what makes Holmes Run Acres unique. Obviously you guys live there, so you see it every day. You know how it's different than other neighborhoods, especially just in your general area, but in all over Virginia. What are some of the attributes that most homes in the neighborhood share? So thinking about roofs, thinking about size, thinking about windows, kind of the same thing. What are physical features of the homes that identify it as a Holmes Run Acres home? And then also, because it's not just about the structures, we've talked about landscape already and the siting of the houses. So what are the features in the neighborhood that contribute to what makes Holmes Run Acres different? Landscaping obviously is probably one of them. Road design is another one. If there's other things that you know of that maybe I wouldn't, or wasn't in the National Register nomination for whatever reason, that would be a good example. So this is kind of just a short summary. Again, you have the National Register nomination. Hopefully you've read at least the significance parts of it. Definitely don't need to read every single house description, because if you do, you'll notice that they're fairly basic. So you don't need to know what every single house looks like. So between the National Register and what Kara and I have looked at, obviously the windows, the prolific use of glass, a lot of those like two-story lurias, their windows are very significant. Edith mentioned this earlier, we talked about it. The dwellings lend easily to additions. They were meant to be added on to. So that's important. You wouldn't see a big house that is, completely made of brick and as actually it's like load-bearing walls, maybe it's a little bit more difficult to add on to. The siting of the dwelling on the landscape. Obviously, when they built this, they used the landscape instead of just, bulldozing it and just flattening it and putting houses right next to each other with some trees and perfect sidewalks. Roof shapes, the low sloped and gable roofs or the shed roofs. You don't see much, I don't think anything else unless it's been a modification. The road layout, which I found interesting, that the designers helped design the roads, that there are no sidewalks. I don't know if that's changed at all. Also, I think I read too, and I think we noticed when we were there, you guys don't have any streetlights, which I found interesting. And then also, again, like we talked about, the modern architectural design. So those seem to be things that we think are significant, and so does the National Register. Okay. So we're going to look at, I just took one picture from each different type of house types. There's 4 house types in your neighborhood, as you probably all know. The 1-story luria, and then the 2-story, and those seem to be the bulk of the neighborhood. That was that first construction period. Then there's the Gaddy, which is similar to the 2-story luria, but a slightly larger with some other modifications interior. And then the Bodor. Is that how you say it? I'm guessing. The Bodor, which is obviously its own design with those windows in the middle of the structure. So yeah, so if you guys are ready, I'm gonna, let's see, let's go back to, so let's talk about what makes Holmes Run Acres unique. Do you guys want me to put the video screens back up? Is everybody okay just popping their microphone on? And I know I'm asking everybody.
Yeah, I'm good with the microphone.
Okay. So yeah, so Kira, if you're ready to type down or take notes for this part. So yeah, whoever wants to start.
Yes, I am.
Okay. Anybody have any thoughts about what you think are significant features for Holmes Run Acres?
I put in the chat, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, because I think I'm the youngest one here in terms of my residence here. I've only been here since March 2019, but isn't brick and siding universal in these homes?
Jenny, I can speak to that. It is that every single fireplace, every single chimney, and I apologize, I'm eating, is brick. But on the single story Lurias, you'll just have a concrete base. If there's a little bit of slope, instead of parged, it might have a brick face, but it's primarily just the chimney mast that remains brick. The minute you move to the 2 stories, brick forms the first floor or the ground floor. And the 2 stories are, without exception, at least partially walkout. Some are more walkout than others, but you know, my house, for example, is a 2-story caddy, and it is 3/4 walkout, or at least 3/4 above ground. It doesn't have any window wells, and there's only one side, the short gable end under the carport, that doesn't have, you know, any windows. But there are others that are nestled in a little bit more, so 2 sides are embedded, in which case sometimes they have enough surface area to have brick on the back, but you'll always find the brick on the front of the 2 stories. So yes and no.
And then I mean, on top of that, the siding tends to be, we don't have vinyl siding in general. There are some that do, but most of the siding is wood within the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the most significant features is the roof, in particular, the low slope of the roof, and the fact that it's typically a cathedral ceiling with the beams and the tongue and groove wood. So that there's no such thing as an attic in a Holmes Run Acres home.
Correct.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
No, I was gonna say that's an interesting thing, because the roof has always, I think, for a lot of people in the acres, has always been, when I say the roof, as opposed to the ceiling or what you see inside, the roof is problematic. These houses were designed to be in more arid climates, and our low pitch lines on our roofs create a lot of problems, and that is a big concern amongst people in the acres of what to do with these gravel roofs. These gravel roofs are not particularly suited for this climate. And so I think that's just something not to, you know, address today specifically, but looking forward of what are the options moving forward, because these were designed, I mean, frankly, it's a mimic of a lot of what was in Palm Springs and mid-century modern, very arid climates. And these roofs create a lot of problems. And I'm not enamored with I just call them the plastic white tops that are going over the tops of so many houses in the neighborhood. But I don't know how to resolve that and what's appropriate or not appropriate. But I would say that a lot of people in the neighborhood have a big concern with the roofs. I think it's a defining feature, but it's also a problematic feature within the neighborhood.
I want to, I just want to address that. Actually, asphalt roofs, which is what we have, but with the gravel ballast, have been used on the East Coast commercially for decades. State, you know, any of the uses for commercial. So I think early on in the acres, when there wasn't as much tree coverage, there probably wasn't as much moss growing up. But part of it was there weren't as many materials to address. We didn't have TP, you know, we didn't have EPDM, we didn't have TPO, any of these membrane roofs the way we have now, or at least they weren't as successful as they are now. So we didn't have a lot of alternatives when we went to a flat pitch. So I think that the asphalt with gravel ballast, and the ballast in a lot of cases was also there to prevent wind shear uplift. So it actually carried a structural component to it as well, but and it was also there for light reflection. But I think that as we move forward, there are a lot of people addressing this. And for example, a couple of years ago now, like, I guess it would have been exactly a year ago, a couple of weeks ago, we had a Smithsonian tour come through Holmes Run Acres, and 2 of the people who were also leading that tour, one of these gentlemen was the head of the Pope Leahy House, which is a Frank Lloyd Wright house that was relocated to the Woodlawn Plantation when 66 went through its site. And I asked him specifically about some of the maintenance issues we've had, because the roof it is an issue. I mean, right now with Jenkins gone, you know, roofs that used to maybe cost
right.
$6,000 are now costing like 25 grand to replace. He said that for budgetary reasons, they cannot do tar and gravel. And I'll make a note to try to follow up with him, because I know that they were replacing the roof imminently, and I'm not sure what they ended up with. But he said, you know, it was a big debate for them for a long time, because they were trying to stay architecturally true to what Frank Lloyd Wright had. But there's a great example right there of, you know, an architect who was kind of pushing the envelope of what was available in his time. So I don't think that he, looking back, and I don't think that it mars the aesthetic of the architecture to put a different roof on. I think
right, and I think, I mean, you're right on, Edith. I'm thinking that the alternatives are important to the neighborhood.
Right.
And I think that's what we should look at. There's the technology's advanced so much. There are alternatives that are significant that still are in keeping. And I want to make sure that we keep a sort of a broader perspective on what that means, because I, like you, I love Frank Lloyd Wright houses. I've probably visited, I don't know, probably 20 of them. And I agree. And back then they were good for their times, but for now, I think a lot of people in the neighborhood are faced with the challenge of what do we do with the gravel roofs, but still considering it inclusive and not detrimental to the nature of our houses.
Yeah, I think a hardy plank is a prime example. There are plenty of reasons why I wouldn't use hardy plank, and those have to do with mold in the walls and things like that. But from a look standpoint, you know, I think they came to this wood early on, and I think from the street, you got to remember that our historic registry and the historic overlay district that we're trying to achieve is neighborhood wide. It is not house specific. We're not trying to recreate, you know, Victorian details and things like that. We are going for the overall comprehensive feel and character of the neighborhood. And a huge, I would argue that the biggest part of that is the modest scale. Patrick, if I live next to you, which I don't, but if I did, and I decided to put up a second story, you know, in addition to whatever I had, or, you know, put up a A-framed roof and really built out my building envelope as aggressively as I could, it would forever change the way you appreciate every single space in your house, because these houses are so indoor outdoor, because they're so transparent, because they have so much windows. Our windows just don't make sense unless we have the nature to go with them.
So I'm gonna jump in real quick, because we're getting a little too in the weeds. I think Patrick's point is a great one, and that is, as we go through this process, we're determining what we think is significant and is important. When we get to the point of the design guidelines, then that's where we're going to talk about. So roof shape is important, and to look similar to what it is now. Then we'll have the discussion of what are the other options that are available that will keep that same look. So, but I want to kind of pull it back into, so what other attributes of the homes? So we've talked a little bit about roof shape. What about size, either height or massing?
This should be a fun conversation.
And again, I don't want to get too in the weeds about what exactly is right.
I'll take a stab.
Or is it significant to the neighborhood?
I'd like to take a stab at that, and I think I can make it quick. Yes, I think massing is of paramount importance. And I think the other thing is you could create two different houses that are 3,000 square feet. Our floor plate is 900 feet, more or less, on one floor. So the two stories are around 1,800 feet. You could create a 3,000 square foot house elegantly, and you could create a 3,000 square foot house atrociously. They're both completely capable of being done. The difference is to do it within the character of Holmes Run, you would break down the massing and break down the scale for the.
Okay.
Incidentally, that works better with the interior circulation anyways. If you didn't care, didn't have a history, weren't interested in the character of the neighborhood, put a big block you know, I mean, you could articulate that blob, but you could just put one giant. So really, it was really within the realm of possibility. Our sites are pretty big to push and pull it. Nancy, Garon, I would suggest that your house is a really good example of a sensitive way of doing that. Your house is larger than many, but the massing is broken down and the scale is such that you know you still appreciate the origin of the house. So
okay, so far one person thinks massing and size. Height, obviously everything that was originally constructed was 1 or 2 stories. Is that and this is for the whole group, obviously, is the height significant?
Well, I think overall, so Edith, I love you. By the way, I'm just saying that I'm more concerned about, and I think a lot of people are concerned about maintaining I'm not maintaining the size, and I think a lot of people who are against this, we're not so much maintaining the size, but maintaining a mid-century modern look and feel to the neighborhood. And you can have, I mean, I would not complain if my next door neighbors, I won't mention them, but if they want to tear down their house and put in a Frank Lloyd Wright house that was a little bit larger than mine, I would not care about that if it was in certain, you know, parameters. Do I want a 4-story? There's probably, and I know there are 3-story Frank Lloyd Wright houses, probably not 4-story, but it's, so I think the concern of the 20% or so is, are we maintaining the architectural integrity called mid-century modern, or are we maintaining the size and scale? And I know plenty of people, there are some people on the line who are here today who have bumped out their houses, that have done things that, you know, so I don't think that these houses were designed to be built out further.
Yeah.
And that's really the heart of the neighborhood. Was it meant to be built out to a, you know, monolithic mid-century modern house? I don't want to argue that. I don't think so, but you know, whatever. It's, you know, it's allowed. And so I don't know how we resolve that.
I think I know, I might have an idea for how to resolve that. Nicole, your question was, is the height important? And I think the height is important, but so is the width and depth. And if you look at Illyria versus Agatti, Illyria is, it appears, at least from the outside, I could be wrong, but it appears wider and deeper. Well, maybe not wider, but it appears deeper anyway.
I think they look, Jenny, I think they look taller.
No, so a 1-story.
I don't know why, they look taller. Yeah.
So I mean, technically, I guess this is a one-story Illyria. I'm not sure. I've got a basement. It's a full walkout basement, but my house looks to me like it's deeper than Agatti, which is kind of wide and narrow and tall. So if we take those 2 dimensions from the 2 different houses and we combine them and say, you can't go higher than Agatti, right? Which is 2 stories above ground. Okay? But you can go as wide and as deep as whatever the widest and deepest is in the original design. And then that probably, I think that should give everybody some space to expand.
Yeah, so I'm gonna, I think this is a good discussion, but again, we're getting really into the details. And so I think what we're trying to do right now is determine what we think is significant. Not every single detail, but
you're right. You're right, Nicole. I'm going to help you. I love the fact that we don't have streetlights, and I wish some of the streetlights would be removed.
Okay.
We generally don't have sidewalks. I wish the sidewalks that were in the neighborhood would be removed. But that's a general thing about the neighborhood. We don't have these offensive streetlights for the most part. Some places do. We don't have sidewalks that are cutting through people's, you know, the front of their yards. So that's an attribute. So to get us back on track.
Okay.
Sorry about
Thank you. No, that's great. No, it's very easy because I think everybody has so much knowledge and information about this, and we will get to those specific things. But we're gonna try to determine, kind of like what you said with like the National Register stuff.
This is a weird one, but the neighborhood was actually very planted with very native trees in general.
Mhm.
Some of them were introduced, but we have some very unique attributes to the trees and all that were planted here. We have obviously the oaks, but we also have the understory trees of the red buds. We have the dogwoods. There is something about the landscaping that is also unique that was put in, which I think is important to know because I'm a plant lover. So I've noticed that about the neighborhood for years.
I would say that like landscaping in this neighborhood would be offensive. That should not be done.
What kind of landscaping? Sorry, I missed that.
Like xeriscaping, where you just like, I'm just going to turn it all into gravel or all into mulch or whatever. Like removing all of the green would be really, or like even just removing all of your trees, even though the trees are bloody expensive and problematic, like removing all of the trees on your property would, I think that would be a problem for a lot of people.
Other things to talk about. So if you're looking at a Holmes Run Acres house and you're like, I know this is a Holmes Run Acres house. We talked a little bit about windows. Does everybody agree that the use of windows was significant for the neighborhood?
Yeah, I think the picture windows have to remain because they are also infill on the repetitive base structure, which is amply visible, and the large eaves. The eaves are probably the most defining character other than the slope for the roofs.
Okay.
Also, some architects tell me, because I don't know for sure, but I remember when we talk about the houses being built into the landscape, there's a certain way that they're oriented so as to provide privacy. So that like when, I guess it's something like when you walk out your front door, you're not staring straight at your neighbors or they're not looking. Though I don't know that with all the windows, that affects anyone but you. So is there something in that?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
I definitely.
that's extremely important. Yeah, it's extremely important. Thanks for bringing that up because the orientation of the houses and how we don't feel like we're looking, even though we can see our neighbors' houses, the orientation is not linear. It's very, everything's adjusted. There's the front of one house that may be the same model as the next one is the back of another. And no, the orientation of the houses in general, front versus back is very important and it's very unique to this neighborhood. I think that's an important aspect to capture is the orientation of the houses and how they're laid out.
I agree. They were cited with rigorous intention, and that's why you don't, and also to take advantage of the landscape. But you're exactly right. If you have a large window, it's not looking into somebody else's bathroom or picture window. So you can sit in your house, glimpse your neighbors, but you don't feel like you could open up a window and pass the hors d'oeuvre.
Yeah. Okay, so it sounds like we're kind of getting to what we think is a Holmes Run Acres house and kind of also just the landscape and the dwelling. I just want to give an opportunity to some of the folks that haven't spoken up. If there's anything else that you would like to say that you think is significant that you haven't heard yet.
Well, I'd like to say that to me, all of this can be summarized in terms of mass question and height. It's the proportion between the house and the lot that the house is on. When you look out a window, you need to be able to see yard. You've got to be able to see something other than your neighbor's house. And that's why, to me, the question of mass is especially important.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. That's great. Oh yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Nicole, this is a zoning question. It's probably too far gone, but the difference between an R2 and an R3 is quite significant. Is there an R2.5? I mean, is there any, because I'm trying to address some of the questions that folks have about scale of houses. We have the ability to go quite large on these properties. is that even an, okay, it's probably separate. It's separate from the HOD, but it is a zoning question.
Lily, I
Anyway,
don't know
if
if
you
you're
could address that.
Sure, I can respond to that. So the development standards like the setbacks and the height are set for the different zoning districts. We have the R1, and then there's the R1 cluster, R2 cluster, and R3 cluster, and so on. The cluster subdivisions are typically have a smaller setback requirement than the conventional R3, for example, subdivisions. For example, the minimum front yard, the two side setbacks in the rear yard will determine the footprint of the building, and then the height in combination with the setbacks will determine the overall volume of any structure in an R3 zoning district. So it'd be 30 feet for the front, 12 feet from the side, and the two sides, and 25. The R3 cluster subdivision would allow smaller setbacks, specifically on the side yards. But the lot sizes, the minimum lot sizes in the R3 cluster are also smaller, but the R3 cluster has it has a requirement that an open space that would be used by all the properties needs to be provided as well, thereby allowing a smaller setback and smaller yards. So between the R2 and the R3, for example, the main difference is in the front yard and the side yard requirements, where the R2, I believe, is 15 feet, and the R3 has a smaller setback that is 12 feet. And that's because the minimum lot size is also smaller than the R2. And as you go higher, R1 will have a bigger minimum lot size requirement. But the design guidelines or anything that we do here would not be able to, wouldn't change basically the underlying zoning ordinance. Zoning ordinance requirements, unless we go through a specific rezoning process to change from R1 to R2 or R2 from R2 to R3.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your answer, because it was one of my biggest, I guess, complaint issues when I was doing, urban planning and stuff, is I didn't understand why you couldn't have gradations in between that would allow you, an R1.5, an R2.5, whatever, things like that, because I think some of the things could be fixed by zoning, separate from what we're discussing here. But I'm just trying, I appreciate your feedback, because I may want to talk to you, because I think zoning and things need to be changed in general, but that's separate from this meeting. But thank you for the information, because I know the frustration, because we don't have enough zones at times. But get you. Thank you very much.
You can reach out to me definitely anytime. I think you'll have our contact information.
Yeah, Lily's been on all the emails, so you can find her email on any of the ones that I've sent. So,
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so what we're going to do now, so a big part of the process kind of that we've talked about so far is obviously determining what's contributing and non-contributing. Obviously, you have over 300 homes in the neighborhood, and so our plan is Kira and I go through, we look at the National Register, like I said, we look at the information that we've gathered, then we make an evaluation. There are a lot that have not changed since the National Register. So our method is that if they're really easy to tell they're contributing, we don't have any concerns or questions, we make our determination and we move on to the next one. What we'll do, though, is if there are ones that maybe have changed since 2007, or there are ones, well, that have changed since 2007, and we're not quite sure yet if we think it's contributing or non-contributing, we're going to bring that to the group and ask for your input. So what we're going to do for just like the next maybe 10 minutes, I want to make sure that we're done at 8:30, is we're going to kind of show you Holly Court is one of the ones that we've done already. and we'll tell you why we think it's contributing, why we think it's non-contributing, or maybe why we have a question about it. So you can kind of see how we're progressing through this. And then also, once at our next meeting, what we'll do is we will bring you the ones from, say, Holmes Run Drive, and we'll say, okay, these ones we have questions about. We think they might be non-contributing, or they're kind of on the border. And then we'll get your input on whether or not you think it still fits a Holmes Run Acres house. And then that's kind of how we'll progress through determining what we think is contributing and non-contributing. And then that way we also don't sit and talk about over 300 and so many houses. So let me just open up some stuff here. And then we'll do that. Okay, so I wish I could share two things at once. Let's see. Okay. So you'll just have to forgive me as I go back and forth between things. So the first one we'll look at is 3315 Holly Court. It's a one-story Luria. It was contributing to the National Register, and based on our information, it is basically the same. It hasn't changed. So we would say that's contributing, but I'll pull up some pictures here so you guys can see and get a sense of what we're looking at and how we're doing this and how you guys will help us do this. So let me share my screen again. Okay. So if I can zoom in on it here. Yeah, so you can see that in the National Register, obviously they have the description. I'll just read that just briefly. So I'm sure some of you have read some of them, but has an attached carport, has a sympathetic addition along the side elevation. The frame addition is one story, sits on a concrete foundation, it has a shed roof, and is clad in vertical board siding. When we went out there and looked, it looked to be exactly that. And so in our nothing has changed. It still it still looks perfectly like a Holmes Run Acres house. You've got your chimney, you've got your low slope gable roof. Even with an addition, it hasn't really changed the character of it. So
I have a question about this one.
Yeah.
That like triptych style window with, it looks like a bay window. I don't know I've seen that on any other house. Is that original?
I would doubt it, is my guess.
It's not?
Yeah, it's probably.
No, it's not.
It's not. It's not.
And I think that might have been changed since the historic registry.
Okay, I'll check and see. I didn't have any permits for it, so
That's
but
such
yes.
a small change that it's hardly visible. I don't know why they did it, but they did it.
Yeah.
They probably wanted a bay window because bay windows are awesome, Arvidas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of people do that as an easy way to add just a little bit extra space.
They wanted more space. That's what they want.
Yeah, yeah. So does everybody agree that that would still be a contributing building, or does anybody disagree?
No,
that's an
I agree.
interesting conversation. Yeah, I agree it's contributing, but the bay windows are not.
No.
I would be like, no, bay windows are not contributing. But okay, yeah, I'll say the general property is contributing.
Yes.
And it is a bay window kind of in the style of mid, like it's straight lines, it's not one of those curved things.
Yeah, and I think again, the thing is that you want to make sure when you're looking at these, does it still convey that it's a Holmes Run Acres home? So
yeah,
and to me it does.
It
does.
does.
Yeah.
It does.
It would definitely be something that would not be recommended in the design guidelines. You would not see a recommendation for bay windows.
And one way, one way they could mitigate that is by painting the frame gray, for example. It would sort of lessen the bay window look of it. But I mean, I think that's a perfect example of why we don't want to get in the business of saying you must do, picture with sliders or whatever, because here's an example of somebody who put in a window that's not really in keeping, but it still works because the general massing still works.
Yeah.
I agree with Edith. I don't like it, but it's okay.
that happens a fair amount.
Nor do I, Patrick.
Yeah. And that is definitely what we're trying to do, right? Is like it's not so much about our personal tastes. So we're trying to make sure that what characteristics we're saying make a Holmes Run Acres house is what we look for. And so there are going to be modifications that maybe not everybody likes, but you can still see that, yeah, that's a house, and that makes sense. Okay. So the next one, this one is just next, just in Holly Court, 3316. So in the National Register nomination, they just said it has, oops, sorry, let me go back to that. I have to pause it before I go somewhere else. Okay. Yeah, now it's blocking it. Okay. So it's got an enclosed carport, which you guys can see right there in the front. She's in horizontal siding and has a fixed 1/1 paired window. When we looked at through a little bit more in the permits, the history of the permits, they've got an addition on the front. They have a side addition on the north elevation, which kind of creates that butterfly roof line that you kind of see in the back. And then they have a screen door where a little bit of a kind of a punch out here you can kind of see in there. So let me see if I have another. Oops, sorry.
I think in general it's in keeping. I don't like it, but whatever. My opinion of liking something is not important here.
This one, if somebody showed me this, if I moved out of Holmes Run Acres and somebody showed me this, I would look at it and be like, well, it's the butterfly roof line that makes me go, I'm not actually sure.
Yeah.
It's kind of, it's like, it doesn't harsh me out. There's other things that harsh me out, but I go, is it out of keeping? I don't know. I mean, architecturally, it's probably still not out of keeping. I just think it's awkward, but that has nothing. Awkwardness has nothing to do with in keeping.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree. I think that again, you immediately pick up on the slope of the roof, and you pick up on the smaller scale massing and sort of the preponderance of nature. But I would also say, I would hope that the ARB would go back to them and go, hey guys, extend the roof. Give yourself the overhang. That's immediately going to change the character of it. And then at the enclosed carport, give it maybe a 4-foot extension with, a post, and you would mimic a little bit of the airiness of it. So, I think there's some super easy, inexpensive ways.
Right. But Edith, you're stylizing it, and it has to do with money. But overall,
yeah,
does it offend you to the point? It offends me stylistically. But does it not meet the? Does it not really meet?
Right.
What we would want to implement?
That's what I started with. I think that this would pass muster, but
yes,
I think it would be appropriate for the ARB to say, hey, you guys, without a lot more money, it would, even tweak it.
I say that.
I'm gonna kind of bring everybody back and just.
I know, I agree. No, I agree. But I'm going to say, I have to put it on the record. That is the concern of the people who did not agree with the historic overlay district is when do you cross into stylistic opinions versus what fits the neighborhood? And I think it's horrid, but I wouldn't do it.
Let me be.
Well, and so let me answer Patrick real quick. So that is kind of what we're going to try to define throughout this process. And then once we get to the point, if there's an HOD, the design guidelines, which will lay that stuff out. So it will be known what should and shouldn't happen. So
this is bad style, but it's contributing.
Yeah. And Kira and I said the same thing. We still think it's contributing. So
I agree. I want to be clear about this. I agree, Patrick. My point about the overhangs was not, hey, let's go back for 5 reviews. It was just that if, for example, we all decide that overhangs are an important part in the guidelines, then this wouldn't have ended up like this, because for not much more money, they would have extended the overhangs, and that right there would have made a huge difference. So all I'm saying is that I don't think it's going to be egregious to create guidelines that can be adhered to, and they're not going to be more expensive. Well,
yeah,
that's all.
Okay, sorry. I want to make sure that we get.
I agree.
I just want to make sure we get through what we need to get through tonight. So I'm just going to move on to the next one. So the next one is one that was non-contributing in the National Register nomination. I don't disagree with that. So in theory, we wouldn't we wouldn't question, like, we look at it, but we're like, definitely we think agree with the non-contributing. So we probably wouldn't bring this one to the group. If you ever think that there's one
Okay,
that we should,
hold on. No, hold on. Why
Yeah.
is this non-contributing? Why
Because
is
it's
this
a strip mall,
non-contributing?
Patrick.
so
What's that?
it's,
Because it's a strip mall.
yeah, if you look at it, the roof shape is very different in the front. We've got columns now. All of a sudden it becomes a very, it's very what's the word I'm looking for? It mirrors itself on either side, which
It's very modern. I get that. That's a beautiful house on the exterior. So why?
I mean, I'm not saying stylistically it's unattractive. I'm
Right.
saying it doesn't look like a Holmes Run Acres house.
I think it does. I think it looks like an updated Holmes Run Acre house.
Okay.
I don't think so. No.
I don't think so. I mean, the roof line is all wrong. The columns have no place there.
It is. You're right that it's symmetrical, and
What do you mean the columns? We have columns in our detached garages, whatever those things are called.
In the
Porch
carports, yeah.
So yeah, the carport. So how is this? I understand. Okay, it's non-contributing, but why is this bad? This is why I'm on this group, by the way. Is that really aesthetically offensive to Holmes Run?
But we're not here to
No,
debate.
no. It's not about aesthetically offensive. It's about does it match the
Right.
features of a Holmes Run Acres house? This doesn't mean this is unattractive, not at all. Because again, like you were saying before, one of the other additions you didn't find attractive, but we all agree is contributing. But
It is
it's still
okay. Does it fit the criteria of mid-century modern? I think the answer is yes.
No.
I would disagree.
Really?
I think it looks more. It doesn't, and it's not even so much if it fits mid-century modern, because that's a very broad category. But I think what we're looking at is
Right.
specifically Holmes Run Acres. Does it look like a Holmes Run
lots
Acres
of-
house?
Okay, so what are we trying to achieve here? Is it Holmes Run Acres or mid-century modern? That's always been the big discussion point, and Edith knows this. Is what are we trying to achieve here? Do we want Holmes Run Acres forever? Do we want mid-century modern forever? Do we want? I mean, what do we really want to achieve out of this? And what is the county's interest in doing this stuff? Because that is not a hideous. I don't think that's not contributing.
Okay. I'm going to disagree, but that's part of this process, and that's, that will be something that we'll take into account.
That's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine.
And as we go through this, it'll probably start to see, again, like when we were talking about kind of the size, the massing, the shape, the windows, the chimney, the landscaping, and that will be kind of what we get into. Okay. So I'm going to do one more, just to give an example of one that we looked at, that was contributing in the National Register. We had some questions and we wanted to get your guys' input, on it. So let me just pull up that one real quick. So you can kind of get a sense of ones that we think definitely want, give me 1 second.
I can say this house is not the most offensive out of the non-contributing.
Well,
No,
but
and
it's not about aesthetics or offensive. Does it match? Does it look like an HRA house? I would never guess that was an HRA house.
Okay, so this
That
one
one,
has
honestly.
So this one has had some additions, an addition in the front since the National Register. So this is one that we would probably bring to the group to talk about. Oh, sorry, I did it again. Okay. Real quick, I'm just going to give a little description. So there was a one-story addition constructed in 2013, built along the southwest corner of the structure. So as you're looking at it right now, it's on that right side. The addition is pushed out from the original structure and has a shed roof rather than a gable like the original. The addition either blocks a chimney or it's been removed. So more pictures or other of the other sides would probably help us. But this is also where you guys come in. You probably know of this house, or you have more information. And so just your thoughts on Well, either way, contributing, non-contributing, is the addition okay?
It's absolutely contributing in my mind. Sorry, I'm the big mouth.
No, I'm
It's
honestly,
absolutely contributing.
no, I'm not saying it's not contributing. We're going to bring ones for you for discussion, and I just want to make sure that we're all kind of understanding what the process is. So this is one that I would just I'm using as a discussion point. So
I think, can we distinguish between between contributing versus allowable in the future? I think losing the chimney is unfortunate, but it's still totally recognizable as a Holmes Run Acres house.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we felt that it was probably contributing also. I'd like to get a picture, just kind of, it's hard to see from the road, but of the other side of that house, just to get a better view of it. But we felt that more than likely it was contributing, but we wanted to bring this one as an example of one that's had an addition since the National Register nomination and kind of what we're looking at through this process.
I walk past
I
this
would
all the
agree.
time with my dogs, and I think this one is it's for me, it's a difficult case because while that addition, and that's what I focus on here, I mean, because the color is like whatever, but that addition, it's clear they tried to keep it in a modern style, but I don't know if it's like HOA modern, right? Like that, so that addition for me is kind of a, that does not look like our neighborhood.
So another thing that we'll need to talk about probably at the next meeting is, and this is something that was a little different in Holland Hills, usually in historic preservation or historic districts, the big important elevation or side of the building is the front, right? That's obviously really easy to see in like downtown historic districts because you're walking the street and all you're seeing is the front. And so additions usually go on the back. But in Holland Hills, what we ran into is a lot of times the front facing elevation is not the most significant elevation. And so we want to look at the whole structure. So that's something that let's think about before our next meeting. Because you guys obviously live in these houses. I haven't seen the backs of most of these houses, so I don't know if it's something similar. So we can talk about that.
Well, it also, I think one of the other things that makes me feel like it's not an HRA house is that they've essentially blocked a lot of the windows. So it looks, I mean, even though they've done it with color blocking, it's still like they're not windows.
No, it's a great point. Okay, great. So we've only got about 5 minutes left and we have a couple more things to talk about before we get through it. But I don't want to keep you guys all night. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to pull up the rest of the presentation real quick. Okay, so there we go. Okay, so that was our test case with Holly Court. Okay, so this is a pretty basic timeline. As we move through the process, obviously things have always been kind of a little bit up in the air. With COVID, it's kind of changed a lot of things, but it seems like we're starting to kind of get more back to normal. You know, the Board of Supervisors obviously is having their meetings, so the Planning Commission, I think, is starting next week too. So hopefully as we move through this, we can start kind of nailing down the timeline. Obviously we had our first community meeting and the Board of Supervisors motion happened in January. The community meeting was back in November. Now we're starting our work group meetings, and this is kind of where we'll start to do our draft recommendations. And we're gonna, right after this, we'll talk about scheduling the next 4 meetings. And then winter into spring, hopefully we can have another community meeting. It'd be lovely to do it in person. That obviously will depend on where we are in the pandemic. Other community outreach that we'll be doing at some point, we go to the ARB to talk to them. We might go there multiple times because obviously they will end up, if there is an HOD, being the ones that are using the zoning ordinance and the design guidelines. And then eventually, probably in the end of spring, we'll have a staff report. End of spring, probably more into summer is when we're hoping to go to Planning Commission, and then eventually, if into the Board of Supervisors. This could all change just depending on how things go. So next step, I'd like to schedule our next work group meetings, and then, which I'll do in just a second, or at least the next one. And then Kira and I will get together and we'll finalize kind of what we talked about tonight for the defining features. And that's what we'll use as we go through this process and looking at different structures. we'll also need to, and you touched upon this, we'll need to start talking about how we're going to get more public comment and input. One way that we can do that is we can set up a listserv that we can send out to people with updates. I think you guys also have a listserv too. And then we're going to continue our analysis of contributing and non-contributing properties. And then in the next meetings, we'll start talking about the other things that I mentioned earlier, things like boundaries, the adverse effects, all the things that the zoning ordinance requires us to look at. But I will send you an agenda generally 2 weeks before each meeting. So is everybody able to have a calendar handy to schedule it, or would you guys like me to send out an email tomorrow to schedule the next meeting?
If you could just send out an email, that would be great. I have to check forward, but an email's fine, I think.
It was easier to do when we had meetings in person. Everyone just pulled out their thing. But yeah, send out an email. The goal right now is to meet once a month, probably around the same time. Tuesday seems to work for pretty much everybody, so we'll do the same time, probably a Tuesday. And I'm trying to put it in between, not the same week as the ARB meeting, just because I have to go to those two, so that way we have a little space in between those. So thank you everybody for being here, contributing. Really appreciate it. I think we're off to a good start. We do have a lot of things to talk about over the next probably 4 or 5 months. If you think of anything at all at any time, please feel free to email me or call me. Same thing, if you email me, please make sure to include Kira on there, so that way she's also in the loop. And if you have questions about zoning, you can contact Lily by yourself, or feel free to email me and I will get you to Lily. If anybody has any other thoughts or questions for the end of tonight, feel free. I can hang out for a few minutes and answer any of those. I know it was a lot of information, but again, we will put the video and our summary notes, and also I'll put my presentation up on the Fairfax County website, and I'll send you guys a link when it's up, so that way you guys can see it again and or share it with whoever would like to see it. So, all right.
So the only comment I have is, I think this is great, by the way, is that I think a lot of people were familiar with the material that was presented in advance.
Okay.
I don't want to call it frustration. That's not the right word. We've been going through this for several years. So I think the people who actually volunteered to do this, I think everyone's pretty well versed.
Okay.
And so I think we're ready to move into.
To jump right in?
Yeah, to jump right in. But I could be wrong. I mean, everybody else should say, speak up. But I think we're pretty well versed, because this has been going on for a long time. Edith actually set this up, and we've been going through this for a long time. And I think the materials that you sent out and everything, I think everybody had read them in advance. I think it's a responsible group. So just trying to figure out if there's a way to accelerate decision-making loops, and do things like that.
I think from now on, we're going to go straight into doing the analysis with you guys. So it's going to be getting your input, your analysis on what we bring to you, and just going as fast as we can. There are not as many structures, obviously, as Holland Hills, which is huge, because they have like 100 and something more. Based on my survey work, I felt like they have a lot more additions and modifications that were questionable, where I feel like in Holmes Run Acres, there's a lot of houses that I don't think we're going to have to go into deep detail on. We're going to be like, yes, that's contributing, move on. So I think that it will take a shorter amount of time to get through this part of the process. So.
Right. Yeah. So I'm just wondering, just take a poll, I guess, a quick poll. Does everybody feel comfortable with the background information? And are we ready to have discussions and move forward, or some people? I don't want to assume anything. Is everybody good with where they're at, or does Nicole need to provide more information for people to review?
I'm good to jump in.
I think we can go back to the guts of the stuff, and then questions come up, we always go back to Nicole and ask about it.
Yeah.
I agree.
Okay. Yeah, so we'll, like I said, about 2 weeks before is when I'll start sending out all the information for the next meeting, so that way everybody will have everything that we'll need to discuss. Also, the WebEx meeting I'll just probably send out 2 weeks before. And so, but again, at any point, at any time, feel free to contact me. I'm happy to talk about it if you have any thoughts or questions. Yeah, Edith.
Nicole, are we trying to stick with the same day? So, you know, the day of the week, like Tuesdays, it would just be helpful for, I mean, I know you're sending something out tomorrow, but we might
Yeah.
be able to pull that down tonight, just, you know, second Tuesday or first Tuesday of the month or something like that.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm going to aim for. So here, I'll just give you what I think it's going to be. And then, so it's October. So it would likely be the 13th. So if everybody wants to check that out tonight, I'll send out an email tomorrow. Just make sure that that works for everybody. Obviously, there will be meetings not everybody can be at. That is fine, as long as you can make it to most of them and or just catch up on the information so we're getting all the communication that we need.
And that was another reason why we wanted alternates, so that if you can't make it, you know, really try to make sure, you know, reach out to one of our alternates and try to make sure they can cover it in person. I think it's really important to have, you know, in-person coverage of this. Moving forward, I guess that would mean November 10th, which is also good because it's a couple weeks before Thanksgiving. Are we meeting in December as well? I just want to make sure we'd
like to meet in December if at all possible. I think what we'll do is in November, we'll confirm that.
Okay.
Because we'll have a good sense of where we're at that point. Maybe we'll have blown through everything and we're like, we're good. We don't need to do it. Everyone can enjoy the holidays. But it would be good if we can do it. And if we need to move it up a week to make sure that we're not running into, you know, everybody, well, I mean, who knows what everybody's going to be doing in December, but.
Right.
But yeah, if we can, because again, I think with Holland Hills, we planned out 6 meetings. I definitely don't think we're going to need 6. I'm hoping 4 to 5. So if we can, that would make us get through December, and then we would start working on our staff report and stuff on our end in early winter. So
okay.
If we meet remotely, it doesn't much matter where we are.
Can you say that again?
I say if we meet remotely by this program, it doesn't much matter where we are. We could meet from any place, even though the holiday season might be on.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you, everybody. And thank you for being patient while we're doing this virtually. There's a lot more shuffling of things, but I really appreciate it. And thank you all for your time tonight. And I hope you have a good evening.
Thanks, Nicole.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Stay safe.
Bye-bye.